everybody, and welcome to Candidate Connect. I'm Alicia Crank with Northwest Western Civic Circle. I am so grateful that you are here to stick around with us. And I'm not sure why I got this echo going. You gotta love live things. So I'm gonna close some screens. There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, I love live stuff. So I am excited because my second interview is going to be with Miss Chelsea Rudd, who is running. Hi, Chelsea. How are you?
Hey, Alicia, I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for hanging in with me so I can figure out how to close one of these screens because there's a lot going on.
That opening music is like so hard hitting. It's like I feel like boom.
Awesome. So, Chelsea,
Yeah,
let's get you started. You got 2 minutes to tell us who you are and what you're doing with this.
sure. So I'm Chelsea Rudd. I live in Edmonds with my husband and our two little boys. We purposely moved to Edmonds because we love it. We love all the cultural activities. We love the community. It's definitely our forever home. In addition to that, I have a background in business. I've been a CFO for over 7 years at a nonprofit. I've worked with federal funding, state funding, private contributions. I'm used to, overseeing, fiscal responsibility. And I'm also really engaged and interested in, community engagement, bringing people together, making sure all voices are heard in our community. You might remember my name around the time of Save Edmonds Parks. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And, I saw that there was an opening on the port to run. And I thought, wow, what a great way to continue getting involved in the community. And so I'm running for port commissioner.
Well, let's just run into it. So, yeah, let's talk about how you first. I think the word is going to be activated across the board with a lot of people. And again, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this conversation series was because we have so many new people who have thrown their hat in the ring for elected office in Edmonds, and a lot of that came from the Hummingbird Park and the whole big red tree thing. Talk about how you got involved in that initially. What as a private citizen got you sparked and going, wait a minute, what's happening here?
Yeah, well, it was actually a neighbor, Marty Jones, who left flyers on all of our doors saying that Hummingbird Park was up for sale. And I just thought that must be a rumor. Like, that couldn't possibly be true. We couldn't possibly be selling off parks. So I emailed everyone on city council and was like, there's this, rumor going around. And it turned out, it was true. Vivian Olson on city council wrote back saying that, they were looking to, possibly rezone it for sale. And she, alluded to the fact that it could be made into a 55 plus community. She mentioned possibly, the neighbors buying it ourselves if we're so interested in it. And so it kind of snowballed from there. And, in hindsight now, with all the information we have now from public records request, we discovered that there was a plan between someone, city council, and the mayor was involved to kind of broker a behind the scenes deal to sell Hummingbird Park, Wade James Theater, Francis Anderson Center to a developer, Kirk Noreen of Valstan Developments. So that came out in the public records request. And during that whole process, I didn't want the park sold. No one in the neighborhood did. And it just kept, kind of growing in terms of, public engagement. I went out and door knocked. Along with the support of Christina Teodoru and Kelly Haller, two close friends of mine, we started social media accounts because we were finding it hard to get our information out on My Edmonds Neighbors or My Edmonds Moms. And so we developed like an Instagram account that was kind of like funny and punchy, and it attracted a lot of interest. And people showed up to the 2 city council meetings, and together we saved not only Hummingbird Park, but also Francis Anderson Center and the Wade James Theater. And so that's kind of how I think my name became a little bit more publicly known, and how I got more publicly involved with what's going on in Edmonds.
So here you thought you were going to save a park, save a tree, and be done, but now you're running for office. Why? How did that jump happen? How did it go from, okay, we went through these 2 city council meetings, we had a little bit of victory here, but maybe not so much over here? Why not just so, okay, I'm going back to my normal life? What happened?
Yeah, well, during all of this, I realized how a handful of people in leadership could really decide our fate. And sometimes in ways that are irreversible. Some decisions the city council makes or a mayor makes can be reversed, with a change of administration. But some decisions, like the sale of a park where it's developed, that's a permanent, irreversible decision. And it just made me think in a new way of the important role city government plays in our lives, and how important it was to have people on city council and port who listen to what residents want. And with the city council, some did and some didn't. And I was like, oh, we need more people who do. And, the port, a lot of people goes, what is port? But actually port does a lot of important things. It drives economic development at the port. It's responsible for public access to the waterfront and the port, and environmental stewardship, which is one of the things I'm most passionate about, and why my main reason why I wanted to get more involved at the port level.
I'm saying you segued right into my next series of questions, was around why the port? Because I think more people for a good reason know more about city council than they do on port, because port, not everyone in the city can vote on these port positions. You just have to be somewhere down close-ish to the bowl. And here's kind of a map of what that is. What would you say to people who are like, who can't vote in this particular part of the election? Why should they care? Why should they want to learn more about who's running for port and being able to support them, even if they can't vote for them?
Well, the fact is, I wish they could vote, because the port is really for everyone, and the port affects everyone. When you're driving around Edmonds, you don't think like, ooh, I've crossed into port territory, right? You're just you're at the waterfront. And there are decisions the port can make that will really affect all of us. A big one is the preservation of the marsh, and whether we're going to restore it, whether we're going to buy, the Unocal property. And a little background there is, the city owns the majority of the marsh, and the port owns a little bit, including the boardwalk. And then the Unocal, or aka Chevron, owns a very large part of it. In order to restore the marsh and reunite the marsh with Puget Sound, we would need to buy that property in order to fully restore the marsh. And so, that's like a really important decision that the port is going to have coming up. And the environmental benefits of that affect everyone in Edmonds. Marshes act as carbon sinks, which mitigates, CO2 gases, which, help with, climate change, which we all feel everywhere in Edmonds. And then also there's the business development side of things, where, perhaps if we had a fully functioning marsh, maybe we'd have, opportunities to recruit the scientific community to set up shop in Harbor Square, where we have, vacant offices and vacant space, and, or ecotourism, where people can, visit and view the marsh, and then while they're there, have a coffee at Redgewig, or stop and have breakfast at Rusty Pelican, and, shop at our boutiques, go to our bookstore. And so, the decision of one area affects everyone, and we're all interconnected and intertwined. And I think, if we really want to move forward in the best way possible, it means working together.
Yeah. And I am going to ask you later on, how can we get more people involved or at least knowledgeable about what's happening at the port,
Mhm.
whether or not they can actually vote in this particular, election or not. But talking about voters, let's go into some of the stuff that I saw on your website and have you kind of talk through what some of your priorities are and give some examples around those. And again, one of the things that often comes up in any of these elections, because the seats are nonpartisan, but then there's the argument of, well, if this person's going to run for a nonpartisan role, they have to be nonpartisan. And of course, my belief is a person is not nonpartisan. We all have a belief system. But that being said, how do you respond to people who, when they come to your website or go to what you're pushing out information wise, they start to see your endorsements and they see all these Democratic endorsements, and you have someone going, "Well, you're supposed to be nonpartisan, so I'm not going to vote for you because you went for those." How do you respond to people when they say those things to you, or if they're thinking those things?
Sure. When I'm a voter, when I am a voter, it really irks me when I have to go on a deep dive through the internet to see where people's values are. Where I have to comb through social media to see, does this person believe in, women's reproductive rights? Does this person believe in LGBTQ rights? Does this person believe that Black Lives Matter? Does this person believe that we need stronger gun laws in this country to protect our kids? And so now that I'm in this kind of like weird, unique situation of being candidate, I really didn't want to put people through, the irritation that I experienced as a voter, where you didn't really know where someone stood. And, does the Democrat Party encompass everything I believe in absolutely perfectly? I mean, probably not. I'm sure no political party does. But the reality is, I mean, we have two parties really in this country. And I sure as hell am not represented by the Republican Party or the MAGA contingency that's in power right now. And, I think that's important because what happens federally affects us locally. And, I just don't think you can be for taking someone's rights away at the federal level and say, I'm going to protect you at the local level. I think you got to be consistent. And, for example, we know there's been a huge increase in ICE funding at the federal level. It's likely we'll see an increase in ICE presence in our communities. And I mean, as a voter, I'm interested to know, like, well, if you voted for that in favor of that federally, how are you going to protect our Edmonds residents if ICE shows up and starts whisking people off in vans? I just think that's important information to know. And I think it's fair that people know where my values are. And, feel like people are like, ooh, I don't like Democrats. Well, I'd like to hear what exactly don't you like? Like, which value don't you like? Because I'd be happy to dialogue with you about it and talk you through why I feel the way I do and how I feel about certain issues.
Okay, fair enough. So also on your website, you kind of break down your priorities into these 5 different groups. So environmental stewardship, economic development, fiscal responsibility, expanding public access, and then a collaborative leadership. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to touch on some examples of some of these things that you have on your website. Again, for the layperson who's not going to read all this stuff, like, what do you mean by collaborative leadership? What does that mean? So let's start with that one.
Sure. So, there's been turnover at the port. Recently we, lost Angela Harris, who was a port commissioner who then became the port executive director. And it was because of the hostile work environment that she was subjected to as the executive director. And, with all of the companies that are headquartered around here looking for top talent, we can't afford to lose our top city employees due to micromanaging them, disrespecting them, and not treating them like the valuable resource to the city and frankly, human being that they are. I've worked for over 7 years now as a CFO. And before that, I mean, I've had many jobs before that in business and accounting. And, there's been tough moments where, we're trying to solve something that's hard. But I mean, you've got to treat people with respect, and you've also you got to keep the team together and know how to work with other people. And that also means working well with our local business community. I've received, feedback that, some on the port have in the past not done a good job at making the local business owners feel cared about or heard. And they're an important part of Edmonds. And I want them to feel like, Port and City Council are their ally and their friend. And that's what I want to be to the Edmonds business community as well.
That's interesting that you bring up the business community, because I know that wasn't necessarily something I think about when I think about the port. I think just bring up the marina, about the boats and everything like that. But the fact that, you say economic development, and also the small businesses and the restaurants that are coming in, especially by the port. We just got a new one. Was it La Palermo? That I think just opened up. So need to go there. So, but yeah, that's part of that port district, right? Or how does business work with the port?
It kind of ties together. People are in the port district, but then they go eat in the city district, which is just one street over.
Yeah.
And collaboration. It also means collaborating with City Council. In terms of business development, and also the different environmental opportunities we have coming up in the future, because it's going to be a group effort to get some of that accomplished.
Gotcha. All right. So you talked about Harbor Square for a little bit. So talk about this concept of Harbor Square serving as a hub for environmental research.
Yeah, sure. So, the Harbor Square area is, it's a cool location, right? It's close to the water. But there's a lot of, empty office space. We could be doing more with it, I feel, to kind of reimagine it for what our community wants now and going forward. And being that it's so close to the marsh, and hoping that we're going to be restoring it to a fully functioning marsh and estuary, I think there's a unique opportunity to bring in a new type of business, the scientific communities who are studying, environments like a marsh where we have, salmon and all of that. I've heard rumors that there's, the idea that some want to do glamping in the marsh. Just to clarify, that is not me. I do not want to glamp in the marsh. When I say, ecotourism, I'm not saying glamping in the marsh. And in scientific research, I would imagine something that is not intrusive and not harmful to the marsh. So I think that's kind of what I was thinking, there. And, because we also need to bring in, more revenue for the city. And I think that could be part of solving that revenue problem.
Yeah. And I was really intrigued. I'm still intrigued by this concept of mixed use housing within the Port District. Is that feasible from an affordability standpoint, do you think?
I think, this is a complex topic, but I think the housing, the high cost of housing in part is due, in large part due to lack of housing, a shortage of housing. If you build more housing, eventually prices are going to stabilize or maybe even come down a little bit. Whether we can, build really affordable housing right on the waterfront, I think I'm more skeptical about that.
Yeah.
But maybe if we are building mixed use housing there, and even if that is more of a luxury housing, people moving there free up space from wherever they were before.
True.
And that's, I hear a lot, especially from, folks here who are retired and live in really large houses. They want to downsize, from their houses to condos, but they still want to live in, the kind of the luxury houses they're accustomed to. meanwhile, there's families who want to live in that house, but the person who's retired, wants to move but can't. And so we kind of just have this like bottleneck that I think building more housing, whether it's affordable or not, will in the end help make housing more affordable if we build more.
Gotcha. So we already talked about kind of also as well the environmental innovation at the port. Which one of these would you like to hone in on? I always think clean energy is something everyone wants to always, know about or talk about more.
I mean, I guess incentivize clean boating just because I think it's cool. When I first started running, I did a lot of research on ports and marinas. And one thing I thought was really cool is just like we have, electric vehicles now. They're starting to explore, electric and hybrid boat technology. And I mean, remember back in the early 2000s, Priuses were really expensive and really hard to get, and nobody had one unless you're like Cameron Diaz, and the Prius would appear in People magazine because it was like, ooh, she's driving a Prius, and you'd be on a waiting list. But nowadays, anyone can have a Prius, right? And I think, electric boats and hybrid boats could follow that same path where they are more affordable and obtainable. And I think we could do something to incentivize that and move away from diesel at our ports. And, one of the ways I thought, we could do that is there's a waiting list to moor your boat at our port. And I was like, well, what if, we incentivized people, like if you have a clean energy boat, maybe you get a higher spot on the list, or maybe we make it easier for people to have those vehicles by putting in more EV charging stations. So
that's it right there.
So, once you have this boat, great, well, how do I fuel it? Well, here you go. It's right here, and making it easy for them to make that environmentally friendly choice.
Nice. I am going to jump into our second course of questions, really about the levee lift and also the port strategic plan that I was able to kind of read through. So let's talk about the levee lift first. You've been pretty vocal on your stance on it, but first I'm going to ask you a two-part question. First part is, how would you explain the levee lift to Jane Smith, who has not been super ingrained in all the conversations and data that's out there? Person's coming up to you at a campaign event and go, what is a levee lift? What is this about? What would you say to them?
Sure. So I would say, first of all, did you know we're in a financial crisis? Well, we are, and it's a big one. The second thing I would say is it's a long time in the making, decades in the making. It's no one person's fault. And to try to blame one person would be an oversimplification of a pretty complex problem. The reality is we've been kicking the can down the road for, a long time. We've been deferring maintenance on buildings. We've been putting off costs that we knew we'd eventually have to take care of, and all of the chickens are now coming home to roost. We have, costs looming that we just can't afford. And from my perspective, it's not due to the city's mismanagement of funds. It's just due to a structural problem. We haven't diversified our revenue enough, and it's been hard. There's a lot of people in Edmonds who don't want to build more housing, which would help spread out the property tax. There's folks who don't want to have big box retailers in Edmonds, and so we lose out on that kind of revenue stream. So it's been a long history of everyone wanting everything, but not really wanting to change too much. And also, the city not exploring these different revenue options. And, Tim Eyman's, 1% law, limited how much the city can increase property taxes. And, at first glance, 1%, might sound great as a homeowner, right? Like, ooh, I'll never have to pay that much more in property tax. But you and I know that costs have gone up. You can't go to the grocery store and buy your full cart of groceries for the same price you did, 5 or 10 years ago, and neither can the city. The city, needs to be able to raise property taxes to keep up with the cost of things and for the great services that we all avail of here in Edmonds. Most of us love it here and choose to be here, and part of that is the charm and the amenities we have. Our parks, our police force, our neighborhood is safe. I said in the op-ed I wrote in my Edmonds News, Edmonds is the type of town where you can leave your windows open at night and your stroller parked out front, and bring your kids to the 4th of July parade, and we have the arts festival and the summer market, and all of these things together, including our parks, make Edmonds such a great place to live. And these aren't fluffy things. These are things that really add to day-to-day life quality of living. And in addition to all of this, we'd also be cutting our domestic violence coordinator. We'd be reducing routine police patrol. What else are we cutting? There's a lot on the chopping block. Human services.
And I saw that whole list, and so I brought up when you said you brought up the letter to the editor. So put a snippet up right now, and there is a link, and that's the hyperlink. If people go to My Edmonds News and pull up this article, if they click on that part there to take you to that document that talks about all of the cuts that would be proposed should this not happen.
Yeah, and so now there's this levy on the ballot in November that will help us close that budget deficit and allow us to keep all of the things that we really enjoy, all of us enjoy living here in Edmonds. And, I get a lot of, I see a lot of comments saying, oh, well, these are scare tactics by the city. And to that, I say, well, when the city doesn't communicate with you, you say they're hiding something. And then when they do communicate with you what's going on and what has to be cut, you call it a scare tactic. And it kind of feels the city is damned if they do and damned if they don't at the moment. We saved our parks. The city, took them off the agenda. And I feel it now. It's, residents, it's on residents to, as I said in the article, what did I say? Put your heart where your money is, and fund the city we love.
Now I appreciate your answer, but so now I got to tag in on a piece of that, which is, at least I believe that some of the questioning where you get that damned if you do and damned if you don't is that there's been a level of mistrust that's been built.
Yeah. I get it.
So I think you always will have your naysayers one way or the other. But I do think too, and I said this a little bit during the interview with Alex yesterday, is that, post 2019 has been insane. That was the last time that we had, there was a city council election in 2019. So they started in 2020, and a couple of months in, pandemic. And now everything that, we knew to be normal or true has changed and really hasn't rebounded since then. And I think there's a lot of people who are in a new situation, whether it's mayor or council members, that were like, this is a whole new thing. We didn't prepare for this. We don't know what to do with this. And fortunately or unfortunately, I think that opened up the floodgates to what's been happening financially to where we are today. So clearly, we can tell that you are pro levy lift.
And I don't blindly blindly trust the mayor and the city council. I mean, if you'll remember, I uploaded all of their emails that I discovered from the public records request so people could see what's going on. And it turned out to be pretty shady. Some of them were speaking out of both sides, and were planning to sell the parks, even though they had told the media and they said to us, they weren't. So I get it. But I mean, we are definitely in a financial crisis that's not manufactured. And I would also say to, Jane Doe on the street who was asking about this, that this property tax increase for the average homeowner, which has been determined to be, in an $800 and some $1,000 house, that would be about a $60 a month increase in your taxes. per month to keep all of this stuff.
Now, Jane Doe just heard what you said. She's like, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
But now Jane Doe is like, Chelsea Rudd, I am feeling taxed. We got RFA that just passed. We've got this levy lift that may pass. We have this cultural access sales tax. We have the public safety sales tax, and potentially two more things on the docket being the B&O tax and potential parking fees, paid parking in downtown. They're feeling super taxed. Where does it stop? What do you say to someone that says, this feels like a lot and it's a lot at one time? Why should we vote for this other tax when we got four others that we need to worry about right now? What's the difference? When is enough enough?
When is enough enough? Well, I think the city council and the mayor are acutely aware of the fact that, the property taxes can't solve every problem forever and ever and ever. Like eventually there is an end to it. And just taking the temperature of the town, I'm guessing this is probably it. Mm-hmm. And after that, the city really needs to diversify their revenue and the way we bring in money. And if they don't, I'd be surprised if the public went for if this levy passes, if the city doesn't diversify revenue and take some of the burden off of homeowners and taxpayers. I think they'll lose a lot of trust and probably would not be able to pass another levy again in the near future.
How confident are you? We'll move on from this in a second. I just wondering, how confident are you feeling about this levy lift passing? And I asked that because I learned through some other work I was doing a couple of months ago, Everett had a similar one last year that was less than ours, and it did not pass in the larger city as Everett. Do you think that it does have a chance of passing here?
I'm going to say yes, and here's why. I think if we can get enough people to know what's at stake, they will vote yes. And, whether it's Everett or Linwood or Seattle, nobody has as much team spirit as Edmonds. I mean, you don't see people in Everett or Redmond walking around with sweatshirts that say Redmond or Everett on. People love Edmonds. The people here are passionate about our community treasures, our cultural amenities, our safety. And I think that if voters know what's at stake, they're going to vote to protect it, even though it'll cost them an extra $60 to $80 a month in their tax bill.
I was doing, I like my data, a little bit goes a long way. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about when was the last time there was like a contested port election. I think it was 2021 for the at-large position. And the one since then has been one person either appointed, and then the election, they didn't have an opponent. So this is the first time in a while that there's been a contested race for one of the port seats. Mm-hmm. What made you choose that particular seat?
That's my home district. I live in District 1.
Okay. But you wanted the District 1, not necessarily the at-large one.
Yes, and I also think I provide an interesting foil to my opponent. And, I think it's good for voters to have choices and, let the chips fall where they may and, just give voters choices.
Well, we're going to take that and slide on over into more port activity, port business, which is the strategic plan. I love a good strategic plan. So the port has a lot of goals within their strategic plan. And I'm not going to pull up all of them, but of the ones that I am going to pull up, it would be interesting to hear from you kind of on one of each of these. Which ones are you kind of leaning towards or have a positive spin about? So let's start with the real estate goals.
Yeah, I think, I don't have an answer to this, but I'd like to see us solve the parking plan because, if we want to have, more, backing up, public access is one of the pillars of the Port Commission is in making sure people have access
Mhm.
to the port. And so one thing I hear continuously is there's not enough parking down there. But at the same time, in the winter, there's often a lot of parking, and in the summer there's not. And so I think finding a solution to that would be really worthwhile. And I don't even know if that literally means like a parking lot.
Mhm.
Maybe it could mean like a shuttle, of some sort, more public transportation, and particularly transportation that helps bring people up from Highway 99 and other parts of Edmonds to the waterfront.
Mhm.
Not just, whatever is convenient and most easy for residents who live in the bowl. And FYI, I live in the bowl. Nothing against bowl people, but
Yeah.
just finding, parking and transportation solutions for the port.
Okay, so that's literally goal number 2 then, about the
Yeah.
focused parking master plan. I love it. Can you tell I was in land use and zoning for a while? Okay. All right. Financial goals. Again, you brought up a lot of things about financial and fiscal responsibility. Any of these particular goals that you want to touch on as far as the strategic plan is concerned?
Let's see.
I think you already kind of touched a little bit on number 5 about developing a business plan for the boatyard. And maybe part of that is that
Yeah.
incentivizing.
I'd say probably goal number 8, develop and adopt agreed upon criteria for evaluating new business opportunities. As an environmentalist and somebody who cares a lot about the environment, I would want to make sure that our new business opportunities, whatever we decide to pursue, are done in the most environmentally friendly way possible. And that we aren't just meeting environmental standards, that we're exceeding them. And so I think I'd like to have, a say in that and make sure that that's worked into, future plans. And that's part of the criteria, not just can we do this, but should we do this? Is this the right thing for the environment? And is it also a right thing from a safety perspective, given climate change, the environmental changes that are going to be happening at the port, making sure that businesses and residents who build along the waterfront know it's not a long-term forever thing. With sea level rise and climate change, sea level is going to rise, there's going to be increased flooding, and know that the businesses down there are going to be affected. And so planning for that from a business development standpoint, and making sure that new businesses that go in are planning for that.
One of the things we don't hear a lot about, especially now, we hear a lot about the city's financials, but not necessarily the port.
Mm-hmm.
How are the port's finances?
Stronger than the cities. They have about a 9.2 million operating budget. Property taxes only account for about 6% of their revenue. Most of their revenue comes from moorage fees from boats that dock at the port. So yeah, they're in a better financial place than the city is, and that's why I think the port will be in a unique position to help with restoring the marsh, because when the Unocal property goes up for sale, we need to buy it, but the city is in dire financial straits. I don't think they're going to be able to buy it on their own without help from the port, and probably from private partnerships and help from local environmental groups that have been exploring grant opportunities from the state.
Is that a conversation that's happening right now, either officially or not?
I don't know. I know that some on the city council, I know Susan Payne is a great environmentalist. I know she's committed to restoring the marsh. I've heard that port and city council don't really talk that much. That's something I'd like to fix. I like the mayor. We've had our hard moments, with the Save Edmonds Parks movement. But for when all is said and done, him and city council, they're quite friendly and easy people to work with. And I think the port could do more to create those partnerships and work together on things like that.
Now, since you brought up the marsh, I want to go into one of the audience questions that came in, and we asked the same one yesterday as well from Roxy. primarily about how you envision the growth of Edmonds, increasing the tax base, but and importantly too, the preservation of the marsh.
Yeah, sure. So, with the increase in housing, I think it's important that, first of all, we have to. Is Washington State has told us, the increase in housing is going to happen, and so rather than fighting it and saying no, we're not going to plan for it, I think we got to plan for it and make sure that the houses we build aren't in environmentally critical areas, like the marsh. And so, how I envision the preservation of the marsh. So I imagine soon, maybe from now to next 5 or 6 years, somewhere in between there, the Unocal property will probably go up for sale. And the city of Edmonds has the first right of refusal, which means they get first dibs on it to buy it before anyone else. And at that point, the city will have to be able to decide whether they can afford it. And at that point, I envision the port working with city council and working with the environmental groups. There are several very knowledgeable, smart, feisty, caring environmental groups in Edmonds. And they've been doing a lot of research in how to get funding for this, how it should be done. And I think the port and the city council should tap into that expertise and so working together, purchase the marsh, restore it, reunite the marsh to Puget Sound, which will hopefully revive the salmon population. And then, like I mentioned earlier, having a marsh and a fully functioning estuary could be of interest to the scientific community, which would grow our tax revenue if we could recruit, some of that business here, which would also have a trickle effect because, scientists who are working here, maybe they're buying houses here, shopping at our stores, eating at our restaurants, tourists, same thing. And so that's kind of how I imagine growth and tax and preservation.
And of course, the one question that just popped in my head right now is, let's say in that 5 or 6 years, the property comes up for sale. And then the city said, oh, we can't afford it unless we do another levy. Would you support that?
I think that's a complex question. I think a lot would depend on how big it is, mm-hmm. and how much effort the city and the port put into working with the environmental groups that have already done a tremendous amount of work sourcing out grants and funding for this purchase. I think it depends.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Let's go to another question from Kevin. And he's asked, what vision do you have to reduce polarization and improve community engagement in Edmonds to help our decision makers improve policy making? I would say even get rid of that last part. Just how do we improve community engagement? And again, as someone who has gone from kind of private citizen to tree warrior, park warrior to now running for office, you probably have experienced a lot of different opportunities and issues around communicating with the community. What kind of ideas do you have around that?
I would say trying to find, common ground. For example, when we were trying to save Edmonds Parks, just about everyone I met, actually, no, the hundreds of people I talked to, there was one guy who was like, I don't care about parks, sell the parks. But everyone else, overwhelming majority, cared about this, worked together, came together. And, I have neighbors who range from, super liberal to far right, and everyone came together over this cause because it's something they cared so much about. And I think we can do that on other issues, not just parks. I think we can find common ground, things we care about, because at the heart of it, I think everyone loves Edmonds, right? We're all here because we love it. And I think if we can stay focused on that, that goes a long way. Meeting in person, talking in person, I think some of the things that are said in the comment section of My Edmonds News wouldn't get said in person, or maybe they would get said, but in a way that encouraged conversation rather than, a fight. Yeah.
So what happens to Chelsea in mid-November should she not win the election? Does Chelsea disappear? Does she go back to private life? Does she I realize that is not a fun question to be asked.
No,
I think
it's
it's
a great
one that
question.
has to be asked. But as someone who's been there, done that, it's like there's a lot of assumptions, right? It's like, oh, is this person going to just kind of go back to where they came from, or we never hear from them again, or have you been inspired to continue to do something should that happen?
Sure. I mean, the great things about Edmonds is there's no shortage of ways to get involved. There's 1,000,001 ways to get involved. Before Save Edmonds Parks, I was a volunteer for Moms Demand Action, which is a gun sense, gun reform organization. And that was something I was passionate about. So I've always found other ways to get involved. Going forward, if I didn't win, I'm very interested in work that Georgina Armstrong is doing with the Climate Advisory Board. They are working on an Edmonds Prepares program to make sure that Edmonds residents are ready for natural disaster, and that communities and neighborhoods are working together to be prepared together to help each other out in case of an earthquake or a tsunami or whatever else comes our way. I think that's fascinating. I love that. I would be really interested in doing that if I had more time open up. Okay. I mean, there's so many ways to get involved in Edmonds. And then, to be honest, campaigning is hard. And I've spent a lot of time away from my kids and my family. And I think I would just really enjoy spending a lot more time with my family. Yeah.
Well, on that note, I want to give you the last 2 minutes to close out and share what you want people to know more about you and your campaign, or how they can support. What are your final words you want to leave with people?
The words I want to leave with people are, whether I win or lose, I've really enjoyed meeting just everyone around town who cares so much about this city. I hope that never goes away. Edmonds is like a Hallmark town. We all have so much corny pride in this place. And I think that the possibility is wide open just to keep moving forward and making this place even better for the next generation. And I see you around town, don't be a stranger, whether you like me, whether you're voting for me, whether you're not voting for me, say hi. I'd love to meet you. And, if you have any questions after hearing this interview, or questions about my endorsements, or questions about anything I've written or said, or if you just want to say like, whoa, you were a huge asshole on My Edmonds Neighborhood News, you can tell me that too. Yeah. So I think that's my part of it.
Okay, so you're definitely someone can grab a beer with, Carol.
I guess. I actually don't drink beer, so maybe we'll do tea and crumpets.
Okay. Done. Well, Chelsea, thank you so much. Thank you for throwing your hat in the ring. You're right. It is not an easy thing to run for office. It is not an easy thing to campaign. Yeah. So thank you so much for that. And for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, whether it was live or you're watching it later. Feel free to share this out. Hopefully you got your questions answered and got to learn a lot more about Chelsea, the person, as well as the candidate. Our next one is going to be with Councilmember Will Chen, which actually has been rescheduled to Friday at 5 p.m. So we'll send out some updates around that. But otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you then. Take care, everybody, and go visit the port.